Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of Too Cool for the Comic Shop. I am Eric Zavinski.
I'm Todd Crawford.
This week, we'll be straying far from comics and going into horror cinema as we'll be discussing two pretty titular horror films separated by about 2 decades. The first movie we'll be discussing is the Blair Witch Project, which Todd has more experience with, and I have just recently seen basically a week ago. And then Hereditary, which is a more recent film, came out about 3 years ago. So we're going to discuss these two very different horror films, very different tones, very different receptions. But first, we're going to start with the 1999, what I think was a cult classic, but is now just a classic, would you say?
Yeah, it's a weird one, and almost like any found footage film, it's really mixed. And I think it kind of always was. I think the thing that's classic about it most, and everybody agrees with, is the marketing campaign surrounding the film. For instance, there was a fake documentary that aired on, I think it was the Sci-Fi Channel or Discovery Channel, giving the mythology of the film, the website they had set up. It was really one of the first cases of very successful viral marketing, at least that I can remember. And a lot of people really hate this movie. Some people really love it. I consider it a cult classic. I consider it a classic. I don't know that would be agreed upon.
Right. I think in just of the legacy that it set, it's pretty much genre defining. I mean, this was, to my knowledge, the real first found footage film. A film kind of set up to fool the audience into thinking it to be more real. It's kind of ironic, I think, because of the deluge of quote-unquote found footage films that we would get later with series like Paranormal Activity and a lot of movies that kind of go way off the mark. But for better and worse, this was the film that really popularized the idea of such a thing. And watching it for the first time, I can see why. Like, this coming out in the 90s, I'm sure caught a lot of people off guard, even if they weren't even aware of the marketing campaign and just kind of went into a movie randomly one Friday night and came out with different ideas about what movies could be.
Yeah, I think definitely it's the film that I would say popularized it in the mainstream with found footage mockumentaries, of course, in the horror genre especially. You had stuff like Cannibal Holocaust. I think Man Bites Dog came out first. I think the last broadcast or something like that, which I've never seen. There was a few of them before, but I don't think any had the level of success that Blair Witch did. And I've actually never seen either of those films in full. I've never seen all of Cannibal Holocaust because it's got very real on-screen animal deaths. And I'm not the most squeamish person, but I just never really wanted to watch it. It just seemed like exploitation and bad taste. I don't know, maybe it's a good movie, but I never had interest personally. But anyhow, yeah, I think it's a film that's really interesting because on one hand, the more you know, the creepier it is, but also the less you know, the creepier it is. And getting right into the film, I think what's so brilliant about it actually is, and I never see people give it credit for this, but it is structured just so clever. Because how the framework of the film is the first half is the camera crew interviewing people who basically just give you exposition upon exposition, which then creates kind of the rules and the expectations that you have going into the rest of the movie once the camera crew goes into the woods. And what's so great about it is that basically what it's doing is it's telling you a campfire story before the fire burns out, so that's what triggers your imagination for the rest of the film, even though you don't see anything. And I think that the anecdotes given, the folklore provided is so creepy and so effective and just so evocative in a way that almost reminds me of something like Grimm's fairy tales or something. Like I said, very campfire-esque. And these were all basically people that... So the actors in the movie, the camera crew, they were... the documentary crew, they didn't know that the people they were interviewing were paid to say what they said. They thought it was all real. And when they're scared in the woods, it's the filmmakers fucking with them. They were given basically a map, a loose map of where to go, and the other stuff basically was unscripted. It was them actually scared, and that's one of the reasons you get such great believable performances out of them that I think some found footage films like Paranormal Activity or The Taking of Deborah Logan are really lacking in.
I didn't even know that. That's fascinating. So it's almost like they were half guided to be actors, but also basically told, yeah, just also be documentarians and talk to these people as if they're just these rural folks who actually believe in this tall tale.
Yeah, it's almost like the film itself, it blurs the line between reality and film. And the filmmaking process itself also did the same thing to the actors. And it's actually kind of cruel when you think about it from a humane perspective. But I mean, so was Hitchcock, so was Kubrick. And
yeah, right. I was actually making me think of Kubrick with The Shining when you're talking about it there.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes a director, I think Kubrick might have even said this, but I'm not going to attribute it to him because I don't know that he did. But he said essentially a director sometimes has to be like a fascist. And once I might be misattributing that, but that might have been Lars von Trier, which would be very embarrassing if so. But yeah, I think anyhow, it's just a really well-made movie, and like I said, I mean, Taking a Deborah Logan, that's a very good movie, but it's not believable as found footage. It's a good movie. It's a bad found footage movie. Most of the actors, aside from Deborah Logan herself, come off as actors. Paranormal Activity to me is a complete piece of shit in every regard. The only good thing about that is that the wife's hot. Of all these found footage movies, they don't pass the test. You know what I mean? Where you don't think, oh, this is actually happening. I think Blair Witch, even though I know it's fake, I know how it was made, when I watch it, I can still kind of hypnotize myself into buying it, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I was able to do watching it for the first time. That's just kind of what the movie struck me with. Its strongest is that it does feel... I don't know if the best word is realistic, but the groundedness of everything is really what makes the movie scary. I was talking to my fiance Colton about it, and basically I think why the movie is scary ultimately, and your mileage may vary, but I think a lot of people are scared of the dark and being out in the woods at night. A lot of people are scared of getting lost, and a lot of people are scared of they're lost for a long time and they're going to go hungry and they're going to turn on their friends, and all of those fears kind of build up the main fear, which really isn't even capitalized on until like the last 20 minutes of the movie anyway. So you're dealing with all of these other fears that kind of trickle into the movie, and those are completely relatable real fears already. I think that's kind of what makes the movie work.
Exactly. And I know some people don't like that you don't see anything, and originally they did want to show the witch, but I think it was Heather who's holding the camera at that point in the movie fucked up and didn't show it. She didn't capture it, which worked out in the movie's favor, kind of like how the Jaws shark didn't work. And therefore it made Spielberg use more Hitchcockian approach and using the POV to create suspense. I think it's a scene where she says, "What the fuck was that?" I'm assuming, just contextually within the film when she's running out of the tent. But I think that's what makes the movie work, is that you don't see anything. I think it totally captures that less is more approach. I think that it really, to me, even if there wasn't a witch in the movie, it would still be a fascinating film, because I've never seen a film capture better the feeling of being lost in the woods, like you said. And as someone who grew up near the woods, who spent a lot of time in the woods, who got lost in the woods, sometimes as day would come to night, and it would get scarier and scarier. I've never seen another film capture that carnal fear, that dread, and that feeling of just vulnerability nearly as well.
Oh, exactly. Like, I mean, in one of the scenes, they're getting like peppered with like rocks or branches. I don't know. It's kind of unclear, but they're in the tent and they're freaking out, which I can only assume was like the crew, fucking with their tent. But like that just happened. Say you woke up in like the middle of the night, 3 a.m. I mean, what you'd think that would be like a bear or some sort of other animal, like it'll. Well, that's just like you said, primarily very scary. And I don't know. Like again, if you like you or I have been out hiking or camping a lot, I think that stuff may be a little extra frightening because it is kind of relatable to those experiences. But I tell you what, like I don't know who would not be freaked out even if there was nothing in it. By exploring like the last 10 minutes of the movie and the abandoned house or cabin or whatever the hell shed that is that they find themselves in. Yeah, like that's one of the most effective sets, I think, and it's literally just an abandoned house in like night vision.
Yeah, I think it's utterly horrifying. I think the ending of this movie is one of the scariest things I've ever seen. And it's so funny because a lot of people might laugh at it, and the people who don't like this movie, and it's really such a visceral experience that I guess it's almost just an emotional thing where you click with it or you don't. Like a song might be catchy to you or it isn't. And for me, I really would put the ending of this film, not just the camera falling and seeing one of the three characters in the corner, but exploring the house, especially even finding the house and going inside it all. That idea to me is just so horrifying. It's ripped straight from my nightmares. My first nightmare I ever had was a witch. I remember a witch stole my younger brother when he was just a baby. That was the first nightmare I had. And it just taps into that for me so well. And something about it feels so evil, so mysterious and supernatural. It really feels like a real life Hansel and Gretel situation, and I can't even intellectualize it. It just works for me 1,000%.
Yeah, I mean I agree, because really you just have to listen to how you felt after the movie to really judge how effective it was. And I had like that like creepy heebie-jeebies feeling for like a half hour after finishing the movie. So that's when I knew, like 20 minutes later, and I was still kind of like breathing differently. Like I was like, okay, yeah, that movie got me. It got me. And that's kind of how I felt for like the last chunk of the movie. The rising action is just impeccably designed. It's simple. It's a simple rising action of fears and the drama of the group and them fucking each other over. It's getting worse, and they're losing it. And every night, what is it, like 4 or 5 nights that whatever the Blair Witch is doing are just getting fucked with more and more. Like it just builds and builds. And a lot of horror movies, like they have acts and they ebb and they flow. And this movie just felt like it was rising the entire time until it ended.
Yeah, it really is a feeling of dread, and it's a weird comparison I'm just now kind of crafting, but I really think it has the most. If I had to compare it to one other movie, it would be Jaws. Because you think about it, the first half of Jaws is on Amity, and then they go out to find the shark. And similarly, they start out in the town of Amityville, coincidentally, and then they go into the woods. And specifically, Spielberg mentioned how he wanted it to be so that when they were shooting, once they were on the boat on the Orca, and you couldn't see land anywhere, because otherwise you'd be like, we'll just go to land. And that's how it is with the woods, where you feel trapped. You feel like there's nowhere to go because there isn't And there's three very different characters, more so in Jaws than in Blair Witch, but still in Blair Witch, their personal differences do come out, of course, who increasingly begin to get more frustrated with each other and bicker and fight more and more as they're more and more lost.
All right, and it's really what the movie is all about. Like, after the exposition scenes, you are only with these three characters. You're never really supported by anybody else through the entire rest of the project.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's almost hard for me to really even put a lot of it into words. It's funny because this is rounding out roughly the same time frame as my original review of this movie, even with two of us. But it's just it's just something that it's simple as some people are afraid of spiders, some people aren't. Some people are afraid of Blair Witch Project, and some people aren't.
Right. Yeah, it definitely got me, and I was just kind of wondering for years before I watched it, what side of the fence that I would be on. I had a feeling that I would resonate with it and be scared by it. There's just frankly, not enough good horror movies, and then especially not in the style that it goes for. Not much like it.
No, I think there's few that go for the same level of authenticity. And I think it really deserves a lot more credit for that, even than it gets already. Because I think a lot of people do kind of lump it in there with, like, Paranormal Activity or The Devil Inside Me and stuff like that. And when you watch those films and compare them, I think the difference is so profound. In terms of, like, I remember Paranormal Activity was, like, different camera angles at the same time. And, like, it was just obvious that no couple could ever do this. And, like, there's, like, flying around the room, getting thrown around by ghosts and shit. And it's insane and ridiculous and over the top. And, Devil Inside Me is just laughable. But Blair Witch Project, like, I watch it and I feel like I literally stumbled upon something I shouldn't see. It feels like the last few days of people's lives caught on film. And I think the best example for how effective it is it's funny, because it goes back to Adam Wingard, which we've talked about before, but his sequel to the movie. I actually think Blair Witch Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, was actually a guilty pleasure of mine. It's such a fun time capsule for it's silly, it's cringy, it's not necessarily a good movie, but I have an affinity for it. I love it. I even have an autographed glow-in-the-dark cover comic book that ties in with the Blair Witch Project. So I guess it is loosely related to comics, because there were some comics and some awful novels from around the time it was released. But anyhow, the more recent movie that came out, just called Blair Witch, is so fake. There's gore in it. There's jump scares. There's, like, CGI special effects. You see the witch. And then Adam Wingard's like, no, that wasn't the witch. That was an alien. It's actually UFOs at the end. And I'm not even making that up. There's time travel. It is fucking horrible. It is one of the worst movies I've seen this decade easily, and the worst theatrical experience of my life. And I went into it with an open mind because I wanted to enjoy it. I even like the shitty original sequel. So I thought that, if anybody's going to like this, maybe it'll be me. But I think that film truly, if nothing else, helps me appreciate how great the Blair Witch Project is.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I could have seen this. I think it was on Amazon Prime, or still is. And I was like, no, I don't hate myself that much.
I would recommend,
like, 2 hours.
Watching clips or something. Just to see how fucking bad it is. Like, we talked about Death Note.
Yeah, I might have to do that after this episode, honestly.
Death Note is Citizen Kane compared to Blair Witch, as far as I'm concerned.
Oof, that's rough.
I'm not even joking. Like, I hate saying that, but, like, I didn't like that. I'm not into Godzilla vs. Kong, but, like, Godzilla vs. Kong was, like, maybe, like, a 4.5 out of 10. And I'm like, this guy's really stepping it up. He brought his A game. Because I would legitimately give Blair Witch a 1 out of 10. And I never give 1 out of 10.
Right. Then there was also the most recent addition to the Blair Witch mythos, even if there is a canon. I don't know. There's probably a lot of people who just count the one movie. But there was a Blair Witch video game, which I heard you reviewed as well.
Yeah, I did, and it's funny. I was just talking to my brother about that today, because we've been talking about video games a lot on the phone, and I like that game quite a bit. The only issue with it is, unfortunately, the combat system and the scares. Basically, how it is you walk into scripted sequences where your dog starts barking, and you have a flashlight, and you have to shine it in the direction of the dog where the dog's barking. And then it'll be a quick flash, which basically looks like how the Blair Witch looked in the 2016, I think it was, movie. And it's just clunky. It doesn't work. It's a clever idea, but it's almost game breaking because you know the rest of the time, and it captures being lost in the woods incredibly well. It's really great in that regard. But you're walking around and you're not scared because you know you're going to get into a scripted scare sequence 90% of the time. So you don't actually feel like something's going to happen when you should be scared with every turn. You know what I mean? You should be paranoid.
Right.
But instead, until you enter an area and your dog starts barking to alert you, you know you're good. But I like the game quite a bit. Like, it's like a 7 or 7.5 out of 10. Like, where it works, it really works. Where it doesn't work that well. But the final, like, once again, like the movie, the final, like, hour of the game where you're in the house, the Rustin Parr house, is great. It's filled with shit. And it really makes up for everything that doesn't work in the game, as well as the dog AI and just the woods themselves. Like how the movie captures that feeling of being lost in the woods, so does the game. And I remember I moved right by a park when I got the game, like that month. It was like my moving gift to myself. And I was walking around the woods, and I was kind of creeped out thinking about the game. I was like, this is like deja vu. So I don't know. I like the game. It's not perfect, but as a fanboy, I had a good time with it.
It sounds like a pretty fun experience. I mean, it's really like almost putting yourself in the. I mean, honestly, the what's her name, Heather. You know, she's kind of like a video game protagonist in a way because she is controlling the project. You know, she's filming everything. It's not like the Paranormal Activity thing where it's like a camera on the wall and it's like bullshit. It's like all of this stuff is happening because these protagonists are actively pursuing, you know, what it is they're looking for.
Exactly, yeah. And the film itself, of course, is enhanced because it's first person. So you have this POV perspective, which puts you immediately in the sequence of events. Which lends itself to a video game adaptation pretty easily as well.
Right.
But
no, yeah. I mean, honestly, I think I'd give this movie a 9 out of 10. You know, there's not a lot wrong with it. I mean, there are certain things that come with the realism of the camera crew being a inexperienced documentarian here, and there's obviously a lot of shots where you don't know what it is you're really seeing, but again, that kind of plays into the horror aspect. So for its effectiveness I think is very strong. Overall, I think it's rewatchable too, because again, those carnal fears I don't think really go away. It's not like some more cheaper jump scare movies where the fear will be completely gone like the next time you watch it.
Yeah, I definitely get that. It's a funny film to even rate, in my opinion, because it almost just is, if that makes sense. It's like rating your favorite fairy tales or something. For me personally, like, I have to give it an A+. It's just a perfect thing that it is. I can't think of another movie that's as effective with what it does. It's not the scariest film I've ever seen. It's not even the scariest found footage film I've ever seen necessarily. but the way in which it's scary and the way that it captures my fear, only that film does in the way that it does. I think it's wholly unique in what it is, and I just absolutely adore it. It's a major inspiration for me, just with my own writing, and I don't know, I just love it. I love showing it to people. I love watching it before going in the woods. I just have a great appreciation for this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad I finally got to it. It was like, I think this episode will be coming out still in May, so it's on Netflix until May 31st.
So the next film is Hereditary by, I think his name is Ari Aster. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
It's either Ari or Ari. I believe it's Ari though. Anyhow, I actually didn't want to watch it again today, even though I promised that I would. But I held myself to it because I wanted to stand by my word and be honorable. So I have now seen the film twice. And I was very tempted not to, because I've been having a really fun time playing PlayStation. I'm reading a really great book. And I was like, I'm going to do this. I said I would. So I watched the movie for the second time. It wrapped up about 10:30. So it's pretty fresh in my mind. And to be honest, maybe the most positive thing I could say was I really remembered it vividly. Between the first time I watched it and now, there was very few things that I didn't remember. It was stupid shit where it was like, oh, I don't remember this guy writing an email, you know. Or
what you're saying is, against your better judgment, this film is somewhat iconic.
I don't know if I'd say iconic. Maybe I've just spent so much time bitching about it that you know, it isn't branded in my mind. But you know, I love that. Like, I did not enjoy this movie, but I've talked about it much longer than the film's runtime. And you know, like, I remember saying that when Man of Steel came out, and I hated Man of Steel when I first saw it. But I remember being like, you know, I didn't like this movie, but I've talked about it for like 20 hours. So that's something.
Fair. That is fair.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, to open up the discussion, I mean, Todd and I have kind of talked about this movie, I think really since I saw it, because I actually think you saw it before I saw it. Then I saw it like a year later, because it came out in 2018, and I think I saw it in 2019. I watched it with my brother, and we had a very disturbed viewing experience, and because I knew you liked, you know, horror movies, so I think I just texted you and I was like, hey man, did you see this movie, thinking that, you know, we would chat about it or something, and then you were like, yeah, I hated it, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like, hated it because it scared you or disturbed you, or hated it because it was bad? And you were like, hated it because it's bad. I'm like, oh, okay, never mind, we have different experiences.
Yeah, well, it's a tough film to talk about, and what prompted us recording this episode now, I want to point out, is I shared a meme on Facebook where it's a guy crying, and it's kind of a typical meme. I've seen a lot of stuff with this, but it's a guy crying. He's like, please, bro, watch Hereditary again. It's a masterpiece, I swear. Come on, bro, please. And the funny thing is that the joke isn't making fun of the movie. The joke is making fun of people who can't accept that some people don't like it. And every comment in the thread was people not accepting that I didn't like it. And I wanted to say, like, you know, that's the joke, right? Like, I don't care that people like this movie. It's like, this is the exact reaction. Same with, recently I made a joke about Denis Villeneuve.
My comment wasn't that I wanted to change your mind. My comment was, well, I guess this would be a good episode.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, like, everybody's an exaggeration. And, you know, whatever, that's cool. I don't care. But I'm not, like, talking trash on people or something. But the irony of it was noteworthy. Same with Denis Villeneuve recently. Like, I've seen 4 of his movies. I liked 2 of them. So I'd say that's, like, a fairly neutral position for someone who's not a fan, who, like, doesn't like generally what he does. Like, I guess I like, it's like the law of diminishing returns. Each of his movies I've seen, I've liked less than the one before it. And I made a joke about it, and people were upset, and I was like, the joke is that you people act like this is like the Monolith in 2001 or something. I don't
Yeah,
care if
right.
people like his movies. I care that you can't accept that other people don't. That's the humorous thing. So, but there's a reason I'm bringing all this up, because to preface this discussion, so much of the defense of this movie, because it is a controversial film, it's generally liked, critically it was acclaimed, and fan-wise I'd say it's divisive but mostly positive, generally stems from the fact that if you don't enjoy it, it's because you don't cross the IQ threshold to appreciate it. And there seems to be this idea that if you don't like it, you're like, oh, the theater didn't give me a spit bucket, I got drool in my lap, so I didn't like the movie. You know, like, you're just like a fucking mongoloid who has no understanding of art. And so I'm going to say two things. First of all, you know, I want to prove that that's not the case. But secondly, you know, I also want to say I'm not saying the opposite for people who do enjoy the movie. And point in case is that Martin Scorsese, who was the person I was quoting with my Denis Villeneuve joke when I said Denis Villeneuve isn't cinema, he likes Hereditary. Now, I think Martin Scorsese knows much more about film than I ever will. He knows much more about art than I ever will. You know, if he was on the podcast as our guest, I would just be silent right now. So, like,
fair.
You know, so, like, it's a tough thing because it's one of those films where it's almost like discussing Passion of the Christ or something, where it's very hard to discuss the product itself without someone feeling attacked or without getting personal. Generally, I see it directed towards people who don't like the movie, but that is something I wanted to clarify for why I'm kind of coming out swinging towards this particular movie.
Right. And well, I think it's actually kind of an interesting movie to pit in the same conversation with the Blair Witch Project, because there was something you said when we were talking about that movie where, you know, not everybody's scared of spiders or not everybody's scared of getting lost in the woods. And people have different capacities for different fears, and kind of that subjectivity to a movie that's also controversial in a slightly different way, like the Blair Witch Project. Is kind of how I think the reception to this movie truly is too. Obviously, they're shot very differently. They're about very different things. But I think the general subjectivity of horror is kind of like part of the underlying discourse of these two movies, even if they're also very different.
I kind of know what you mean. I personally disagree. I think Hereditary is an objectively bad film, in ways that, you know, I'll get into in a bit. But I do think you're right. You know, I mean, in art is, or film is art, and art is subjective ultimately. You know, I mean, like I said, Man of Steel, for instance, I spent just as much time bitching about, and now I adore it. So, you know, it'd be funny for me to come out and say, like, no. There's a final word, right, and I have it.
Right.
But yeah. So one of the I want to draw some weird comparisons with this film, because I think that's the best way to approach it. Because, like I said, generally it seems as though it's seen as this litmus test for film literacy for horror fans, and generally the biggest defense of the film is that, oh, did it not have enough jump scares for you? Did it not have enough gory kills for you? And similarly, I think this film for me is very similar to I forget the name right now. It's something Cloverfield Lane. We'll say 29 or some shit like that.
10 Cloverfield Lane.
Oh, is that it? Thank you. Yeah, and that was like a big thing where it was like, no, it's like a Hitchcock movie. It's not an alien movie. And I watched it, and I didn't like the first Cloverfield, speaking of found footage. I just wasn't into that one. And so I saw the next one to give an open mind. I didn't like it. People were like, oh, because it's Hitchcock? And I'm like, no, I like Hitchcock. I don't like it because I like Hitchcock movies, and this isn't at that level. If Hitchcock made this would be his worst movie. This is a bad example of somebody trying to do that. And it attempting to do this doesn't mean it's just as successful as someone doing it at its peak. You know what I mean? Like, a film's intent and its success are two different things. And I think very similar with this. So, first of all, it's a film about a grieving process. It begins with Toni Collette, who's a very talented actress, and I wasn't into her performance in this film, but I don't think that's any technical fault of hers. I don't want to say anything negative about her. But she's discussing her mother. The title card of the film is just her obituary, which is an interesting way to open a movie, I think.
And, absolutely. Were you going somewhere with that, or are you just?
Oh, I was giving you a window to speak. Right? I don't want to commandeer it too much.
Oh, I mean, fair enough. I mean, not to walk through the entire movie chronologically, because it has been actually 2 years. I did not rewatch it. Movie is about a grieving process for this woman's mother, which in 30-40 minutes into the movie turns into a grieving process for her daughter. I'm imagining that's where a lot of people either buckle in for this movie, change their mind in this movie, or just stop watching the movie, or just something psychologically for me and like my brother, like watching and listening to the reaction of a mother realizing her son had kind of caused the beheading of her other child just made me want to turn the movie off. So that was just kind of a baseline emotional reaction. I was like, hey bro, do you want to stop watching this movie? And we actually considered turning off the movie, which I've never done for any film.
Yeah, that scene reminded me watching it tonight of I'm not saying like, oh, it ripped it off. It's not that. It's just similar in approach, but doing the exact opposite. Interesting enough, of Funny Games. I've only seen the original version of it, not the remake, but I hear they're basically the same thing, where a character's killed in the film, and then it's just a still shot for probably 5 to 10 minutes of just the other two characters just wailing and grieving, and just, I think it's silent at some point, and it's just this still static shot of that. And it's funny because this film does that, but it's actually, you don't see them reacting, you just hear it as you see another character kind of in a state of shock or not reacting. Right.
I just felt I didn't like it. I did not like it. See, for me, Toni Collette's performance is the best part of this movie. I'm not 100% a fan of every story direction and choice that this movie goes for, to be honest. I think her performance really carries me through this film the most.
A big thing for me personally, their performance, and like I said, I don't want to criticize it because it's a talented performance. I'm not gonna be like, oh, it fucking sucked or something, something ridiculous. But to me, it felt very stage actory rather than film, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's very, very emotive and outward, and just, I don't want to say not subtle, because that's, like I said, I'm really avoiding criticizing her performance, and because I don't intend to, so I don't want to say anything that might come off that way. But in my opinion, it just personally kind of felt that way to me, where I felt like I was watching somebody act and not an actual grieving mother. And I'm like, well, this is a very talented actress, giving her all for this role, and I appreciate that. And she probably is the best thing about the movie, arguably. But it actually took me out of the movie because I felt like I was watching a talented actress and not a mother who's in mourning.
Yeah, see, for me, I've known women, couple figures who I have seen in such distress act pretty similarly. So I think for me it was honestly kind of traumatic. Just because for me, I was able to relate personal experience to her performance. Anyway, it's kind of a personal thing, and it's a big bummer. Yeah, I mean, again, that's subjective. I mean, depending on who you've been around and who you've seen experience grief, I think maybe that might change perception of a movie like this, where not very often in your life will you see people that you don't know closely experience grief, and I think that can be another reason why maybe it is hard to criticize performances like that.
I mean, I wouldn't personally agree. I've seen a lot of people grieving, and I've seen people die and shit, and I haven't personally seen something like she does, especially because she's not just grieving. You know what I mean? There's a lot of shit going on. I don't. I guess I just don't feel like there's like a certain life thing that you need to experience. Like, it is subjective with film, but I don't know if there's like a certain trauma capacity to understanding it or anything. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that's what you're saying. I should clarify, but I do want to get into that, because one thing that this film reminds me of that is a film I am a huge fan of is actually, there's two, and it's funny because they both star Donald Sutherland, which I find really kind of ironic. But this film reminds me of a cross between Don't Look Now and it's a horror film about two grieving parents who their daughter drowned, as well as Ordinary People, which is a film about a family in which, ironically, one of their sons drowns. And Ordinary People is just a drama, just an Oscar film. I think it beat, if I'm not mistaken, I don't even remember, I don't want to say, but it got Best Picture over another film that most people think was more deserving. And they're both two very different looks at grief through the eyes of Donald Sutherland, and very good films that I'm very much a fan of, and were very influential on films that I've made in weird different ways. And I think that what both of those films try to do, or what both of those films accomplish, is what this film attempts to do, if that makes sense. And that's why I think it's appropriate to almost compile a list of things, because I do feel like people once again see this film as a cinematic literacy test rather than a work of art that you enjoy or don't. So I guess in a way I'm trying to bring it down from an untouchable piece of scripture, cinematic scripture, to a subjective thing that we could talk about in that way, ironically.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think this movie is a little heavy-handed, and it's really opening itself to be subjective. I mean, this movie throws a lot. By the end of the runtime, there's mixed metaphors. There's a whole plot of Satan worshiping, where it turns out that by the end of the film, the devil is like in the daughter who died, and then ended up wanting to be in the brother's body because that's what the devil does, and then they worship it. And to be honest, by the end of the movie is kind of where it loses me.
It becomes a different movie,
a family drama, and it starts becoming this wacky Satan cult thing, I guess.
Yeah, and one thing I want to address is and this isn't a criticism, this is just a point about the history of horror genres. A lot of people praise a film for having it being a demon called Paimon or Paimon, I forget. But anyhow, it's not Lucifer or something, and people praise it for that. And that's fine. That is interesting. It does add to it adds some character to the film. It makes it a little more unique and memorable. I can agree with that. But I think we're forgetting another little film that also does that, called The Exorcist. Maybe the most famous horror film of all time. That had Pazuzu, exactly. And had a statue kind of, once again, satanic figure statues and like that kind of Baphomet pose or whatever. I'm not saying it's a motif, it's not plagiarized at all. I'm looking at a tarot deck on my floor that has literally that. But right. It's got kind of funny that people say like, oh, it's crazy how they don't use the devil, and it's like, yeah, a lot of films don't. One that does, that this film reminds me quite a bit of, is actually Rosemary's Baby in a lot of ways, especially with the ending where Paimon is born, kind of similar to the way that Rosemary's Baby is born, and you have the worshippers and the fear and dread of being a mother, and the complications that come with that, and the feeling of the child not really being yours, which is kind of one of the more interesting ideas introduced in the film. Is there's an image where Toni Collette's character makes little miniatures, and there's one of her mother presenting her breast for the daughter to suck from as she's feeding her daughter in bed as a baby. And I think that's an interesting thing to introduce. I think, like most things in the film, weird comparison, but Big Hero 6, there's a thing I see online all the time where it's like, Frozen has like sisters and it's about falling in love, but Big Hero 6 deals with grieving over your brother, about being yourself, about teamwork, about this, and it has all these themes. And my counterpoint is, and you know, Big Hero 6 is whatever. I mean, it's a perfectly fine blockbuster. Frozen's a shit. Frozen kicks ass. So I don't like that they're trying to dunk on Frozen, but like, having a theme in a movie doesn't make it a good movie. And quite frankly, the way that Big Hero 6 addresses those themes is not in any way profound or unique. It just has those themes, and that's not a gauge of quality. It's not a stat in an RPG. That's just an attribute. And I kind of feel like this movie has the same thing, where there's a lot of themes introduced, but I don't feel any of them are explored in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that's kind of a, you might not agree, but I think it might be a genre problem. I mean, I've seen a lot of throwaway horror movies that don't even have a theme, so it's almost like in the minds of some viewers that perhaps the very bare minimum of having a theme or themes is like, their minds like, oh, that's a measurement of quality, over some of these throwaway horror movies that get released in January and have no theme, and they exist to make some dollars and to have some jump scares.
Yeah, well, that's 2 points I'm glad you brought up, because I actually strongly disagree with 2 points there. Is that, first of all, I mean, most horror films do have a theme. Like I had mentioned, The Exorcist, A Meditation on Faith, Rosemary's Baby, about pregnancy, you know, The Alien, also about pregnancy and rape, A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 about pregnancy, and that's just a silly, goofy sequel. You have Carrie, about, you know, your fears about your period, The Shining, alcoholism.
You're talking about all good movies, though.
Exactly, and that's my point. Is that, sure, I mean, if you want to measure it against the worst horror films ever made, then I guess you can do that, you know. I mean, you could do that for almost any movie.
You know, not everybody has seen a pedigree of horror films like you and I. You know, I think there was, I don't know if there was like a horror drought in between like the 2000s and the 2010s, but I don't think there was a lot of quality horror pictures out there, you know. So if that's what kids and teenagers are like used to, I think, you know, it might be some of the over exaggeration of another film's qualifications. I'm just throwing it out there as an idea.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I'm referring specifically to people in the discussion, so to speak. So I am referring to professional film critics or people that like write for Taste of Cinema
but I don't care about professional film critics. Their opinions aren't any more valid than, say, one of our friends on Facebook.
No, I care more about my friends on Facebook, but
fair enough.
Like, don't get me wrong. No, like, I see what you're saying. Like, if you, like, you know, I was talking to someone today, just texting while I watch a movie, and I said, like, the end of this movie is basically just a Conjuring movie, and, you know, they were like, oh, I like the Conjuring movies, and I was like, you know, that's cool. I wasn't even criticizing it, like, it's objective.
Me, that's where the movie loses me, because it, like you said, it is like exactly something else that I've also seen. So for me, even though most of the movie doesn't work for you, like other parts of the movie where they're focusing on the grieving process or the family drama, actually, those were my favorite parts of the movie in comparison to the way it ends, or some of the weird stuff in the middle with like the crazy neighbor. It's like was like friends with her mom.
Yeah,
like
she was in the same cult
or whatever.
Yeah. Well, one thing that you had mentioned was the jump scares, because this time, no, here's a funny thing. Once again, this is talking about the discussion of the film. It's not talking about the film in a certain way, because it borderline gets a nitpicky territory. But I counted the jump scares this time, because people always said, oh, it's a slow burn, atmospheric, character-driven horror. It's not jump scares. And I remember thinking, like, there's quite a bit of jump scares in that movie, especially towards the end.
Yeah, there is.
And, I mean, that's fine. Like, the first Conjuring movie, I don't love, but I think it's a perfectly adequate, like, it's a fine movie to see in theaters on a date night, It's a 7 out of 10, and that's nothing but jump scares that mostly are pretty well crafted. And some of the jump scares in this movie are well crafted. But even before the climax of the movie, I did not count the kind of noise thing. I didn't count that at all. I didn't count jump cuts with a quick noise. I didn't count the soundtrack swelling abruptly. I didn't count just visual cues like seeing the mother on the ceiling. But I lost count at 10, and that's purposely trying not to count things that could easily be ticked. I found that most of the scares in this film could actually be called jump cuts. Or not jump cuts, I'm sorry, jump scares, if you really want to look into it, which is kind of interesting. There is tension, and I'm not saying they're all bad jump scares, but it kind of made me laugh that this film has a reputation for not having jump scares when actually I think it has more than the average horror film, which, once again, does not make it inherently bad. That's just an interesting thing about the film's reputation versus its reality.
Yeah, I don't agree with that part of the reputation at all. When I first watched it, I thought that the movie had jump scares. Like you said, I think some of them are effective. I one that sticks in my mind very viscerally is like when they're trying to like burn the letter in the fireplace, and then she does it and ends up burning her husband alive like instantly.
I don't want to
for like a sense of imagery. I think that's very powerful, just like that image.
The image of her first doing it, I think, it's more subtle, but where like it's clear they put some flame resistant stuff on her arm and it burns is a pretty evocative image, I think.
Yeah.
It's I mean, I don't want to sound stupid because maybe this is maybe one point where the film outsmarted me in some way or I didn't understand it. But so she put it in the book and then it burnt her arm. I get that. And then when she put it in the next time, because I thought the first time I watched it, I remember that I thought he threw it in, where he's like, fine. And they build it up that way where you think he's going to and he's going to get burnt. But then eventually she throws it in and he still gets burnt. Do you understand why it is that he's the one to get burnt even though she's the one that was shown to be affected by it in the past? And I thought maybe it's the person who throws in the fire who gets burnt by it. But it seems to just happen. As far as I could
I have a theory as to why it is.
Yeah, no, I'm curious about that because maybe that is something I missed.
Okay, so my theory while watching the movie, and again, I've watched it once, and I don't know if there is a concrete answer. Probably not. But throughout, the daughter dying happens pretty early on in the film. Their relationship is pretty much bubbling nothing for a large majority of the film thereafter. So I think because when she originally tries to get rid of it, is it a different day than when they actually burn it?
I could be mistaken. I think it's the same day, but it's at night when he burns it, I think.
Okay.
Because keep this in mind. I think because they take the son home after he gets hurt, and then that's when she's like, we need to burn it. And then when the son wakes up, the father's corpse is still kind of smoking and sizzling. So I think that's the case, but I could be wrong.
Right. And my memory definitely isn't super clear. But just what I felt watching the movie, I felt that the husband and wife had kind of, in their resolve as to what to do, kind of reconnected a little bit. I feel like they kind of saw each other again. So my interpretation originally of watching the film was that when she's actually successful in burning it, because like originally it hurt her, but when she did it again, it did hurt her again, but in the sense that her husband died. So that's kind of how I interpreted it. I might be completely wrong, but that's what it made me feel.
Maybe. I mean, she does right before it happens. She says like, "You're the love of my life," stuff like that. He's clearly
Yeah, exactly.
uncomfortable
They
and
do
wants to
reconnect a little bit.
leave.
That's right.
He's clearly like, I don't know if he's not. I don't know if he doesn't love her, but he's afraid of her, and he wants to protect his son. But he's clearly making steps to distance himself from her. Maybe not in a divorce
Right.
sense, but in the sense of like, I need to be the head of the house, and we're not on the same team right now because you're so far out there. It's left kind of unclear because
Yeah, I mean, he's very disjointed.
he's
From
really
her.
he's really the character that's given the least amount of stuff to do in the film in that way, where you're more separate from him than the others, which it just is what it is. I mean, not every character is the protagonist of a film, you know. But there's one scene, and it's very interesting because this is, you'll probably laugh because it is the most in-depth, almost conspiratorial thing I'll probably ever say on this show. Because I think I give this film way too much credit actually for the last few years. And getting into that, so one of my favorite films of all time is Dario Argento's Suspiria. The original film, of course, not the more recent one with the girl from 50 Shades of Grey, which I've never seen. It didn't look good. Some people like it, some people hate it, but I just didn't see it. It just didn't look that good, and it was like 3 hours, so I said fuck it. But anyhow, a lot of that film seems random, and then at the end you find out, oh, it's witches and it's a conspiracy, and a lot of the film is fairy tale nature, and it actually makes it scarier, the randomness of it, because it feels as though it's this higher orchestrated power. It's a very kind of an Italian cinema thing. I know it's like directors like Fulci utilize it and all that. And also, you know, for a more mainstream American example, it's very on the nose, would be Final Destination. How these elaborate Rube Goldberg things happen to trigger people's death in exciting ways, which is the focus of that movie. And I always thought, like, a lot of this film, I always said, I can accept that a lot of the film is that. For instance, like the book burning her and then the book burning him. It's witchcraft. It's spooky. And for instance, and I'll break this for me, and I'm glad you brought up that the make it or break it for the movie is the daughter's death. It reminded me of, actually, have you seen the film Manchester by the Sea?
Yes, I have.
Okay. I didn't want to get into it too much, but they're both.
I know exactly what scene you're talking about if you're referencing that movie in this context.
Yeah, and I liked Manchester by the Sea when I first saw it, but that scene almost made me want to walk out of the theater. And then I rewatched it, and I just loved the film and totally appreciated it more the second time.
Oh yeah, Manchester by the Sea sucks, man.
Yeah, no, it's fucking
it's
rough.
good. It's a bummer. It's if you want depression for the rest of the day or the week.
What's so funny
watch that movie.
is that it's such a funny movie. I didn't notice it the first time I watched it, but rewatching it, the character interactions, the dialogue, there's even like a little bit of slapstick when they're loading the bodies into the ambulance. It's weird because that is such a funny movie and it's so needed for the content. But that's completely off topic, but that's kind of how the daughter scene to me is the antithesis of where that for me did not work. And I actually laughed when she got hit by the pool because it was unexpected. I watched like 5 people, and you know there's that party level part of it, you know, where you may not take it as seriously. One of my favorite films ever,
Right.
The Big Chill, I watched on my birthday one year with the same group of people, and it sucked because even though it's a fun movie about friends having bonding together, so I thought this is perfect for me and my friends to watch. It's a dialogue heavy movie that you can't just hoot and holler and all that, you know, party while you're watching. But that doesn't make The Big Chill a bad movie. But I rewatching it, and that was one of the main reasons I wanted to rewatch this movie, is to see like, well, maybe if I watch it alone in the dark, you know, you'll appreciate it more. And the scene to me still came off as kind of laughable and exploitative, but the point I'm getting, and this is why I bring up Fulci and Final Destination, is that everything leading up to her death to me is so contrived. And I used to say, oh, well, you can say it's the cult, you can say it's magic and ghost spooky shit. But
Right, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
and I'm going to, this is where it gets, this is like the tip of the iceberg here before it gets really weird. But so the kid's clearly a pothead, and the mother clearly has suspicions, where we, the audience, see it. And I do like the little detail of like him blowing smoke out the window so that his room doesn't smell like pot. I knew people who did that in college, which is just kind of a funny little thing there. But anyhow, he's clearly going to a party that's inappropriate, and the mother forces the daughter onto him. And I get that that's saying she wants time to be alone to grieve, and she's being selfish as a mother and neglectful. I get that, but her having suspicions where she says multiple times, she's like, is there going to be drinking? He says, we couldn't get beer anyhow, we're underage. And she says something like, that's bull, are you going to be drinking? So she clearly suspects there's alcohol at the party, but she still puts him there, and he still takes her there. And then he leaves to go smoke pot with the girl. And it's weird seeing this like little girl at this party full of like clearly seniors and all that, where like it's hard to believe enough the extent that she put him in this situation. I thought that he said originally, I'm going to a study group or something, but it's pretty clear it's a party. And so that's weird enough, but then she's just there, and like people are just ignoring her. Nobody's like, hey, little girl, like if someone came like, hey, can I get you a piece of pie or something? It's just kind of there, unacknowledged as party as far as you see. But anyhow, she is allergic to nuts, which is set up earlier in the film, and they don't have the EpiPen, which once again the mother would probably send her son with, but she's grieving. I can accept that level of disbelief, It's a film after all, and crazier things happen in life. But then, so he's driving her, and she sticks her head out the window at the exact moment that he's about to almost hit a deer, and then he swerves, she hits her head on the pool, and then he goes home and just goes straight to bed and doesn't say anything. Of course, the parents don't come out to greet him or anything or make sure everything's okay, which you would think at least the father would do, considering he's more level-headed, and his daughter was clearly at a party or something, unless the mother lied about that, which I can say is possible. She lies to him throughout the movie at other points. So then she finds the head, which already I think there'd be a police investigation or something, because clearly it's fucked up. Once again, movie shit, ignore it. But anyhow, it's such a ridiculous Final Destination-esque thing leading up to this death, where they happen to have cake that happened to have nuts in it. They were all cutting just a moment before, and all this other stuff, and she didn't ask, and he left her unsupervised just at that moment, and it's all so contrived. And I was like, okay, it's once again Final Destination, it's Suspiria, it's witchcraft. You just gotta accept it. It's horror movie stuff, right?
Right, and it's a lot of leaps of logic. It's also kind of exploitive, I think is the term you were using earlier, where me and my brother watching this movie for the first time, we thought she was just gonna die of the allergic reaction. Is there a reason that couldn't have happened, for example?
Yeah, I think there's something about Paimon or whatever. There seems to be a thing in this film about decapitation that maybe I'm just wrong, but maybe...
Yeah, I think symbolically they're going for that, but you don't really know that the movie is about the Satanism cult at that point.
Yeah.
It's kind of more grounded at that point.
I guess what I was thinking was you could say that maybe because there was this symbol for the cult on the pool that she hits her head on, that maybe it's a thing with that somehow, where the events were controlled or manipulated by the demon for it to happen. But it doesn't make sense, because it seems like the people seem to have some autonomy over the situation, and Paimon isn't that powerful without the humans guiding him. So it's really unclear to me, and I can kind of accept it and kind of think it's bullshit. Here's where I think it's completely proven to be bullshit. And this is in two quick scenes that are not supernatural, that would be complete nitpicks if isolated as complaints about the movie. And they're not. I'm saying this because it supports my earlier argument leading up to Charlie's death. So the husband, he is emailing a psychological institute or psychiatric institute about his wife. and he says, just exposition essentially, so the audience knows what he's thinking. That's fine. We see that, and that's as Toni Collette is going upstairs and finding her mother's headless corpse in the attic. And they set that up well, where they mention a smell and all that earlier in the film. They pay their dues before that scare comes in. But anyhow, that scene actually, funny enough, kind of parallels a scene in Suspiria as well. But that's, once again, typical horror movie stuff, just kind of a funny, interesting parallel between the two that makes me wonder if Suspiria wasn't some level of inspiration or something. But anyhow, as he's doing this, you see his email, and there's no emails in his folder. Maybe he cleared it out or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But one immediately pops up as he's emailing exposition about his wife, so the audience knows about his wife, and he clicks on it, and it's the cemetery saying, oh, here's the pictures about your mother-in-law that was dug up out of the grave, as Toni Collette's finding the corpse. Now, there's two things happening at once. That's how you build suspense. That's typical filmmaking stuff, especially in a genre movie. But the fact that he's typing this exposition as he gets an email about more exposition that the audience sees, it's not like one thing happens and the other, it's the same scene, is so contrived. And once again, in the grand scheme of the movie, that doesn't matter. But as I'm explaining, all the stuff leading up to Charlie's death, all the stuff leading up to the cult, the entire movie is so contrived from a cinematic philosophy of the ends justify the means. Get to the point where we see a child's severed head rotting on the street. I don't care how you get there. You know what I'm saying? Get to the point where they're all worshiping Paimon and there's naked old people there and it's spooky. It doesn't matter how you get there. And at that point I can... Oh, and there's another scene right after where the son, I forget his name, he's in a classroom, and the girl, the love interest at the party, she sat before him in an earlier scene. He looks at her butt, and then she turns around and looks at him for a second when he says something in class. It's kind of embarrassing, typical high school scene. But then later in the film, when he is being possessed, he raises his hand and his arm's crooked, and he's having similar symptoms that Charlie used to when she was having a reaction, which is kind of a hint that Charlie is now inside of him. And the girl now, he raises his hand, and the camera starts at his hand and pans down his arm to an over-the-shoulder shot, where you then see, no longer directly in front of him, but down the corner of the room, the love interest is looking back at him concerned. Now, once again, a nitpick of all nitpicks. I totally agree. And in universe, it makes sense that high schools switch seats all the time. They used to every 9 weeks when I was in school, some classrooms. It happens. But the fact that character, the only other character in the room other than his friend, which I don't even know is in the room, this is the same class with the same teacher. Because they cut to this teacher many times talking about various Greek plays that talk about autonomy of the characters and whether or not a story is more tragic if the characters within it, if it's preordained destiny, or if they have free will, which kind of gets into the themes of the movie, of course. But the only reason the girl is positioned in the corner of the room is so they could obtain that camera angle of her looking back at him. That has nothing to do with the plot. It has nothing to do with the demons. It is contrived filmmaking, where they did that just to justify getting that shot that they wanted. And once again, it's totally not a direct criticism of the film in and of itself, but it is symptomatic of the disease that I feel is fatal for the entire film. And it's kind of a slip of the card up the magician's sleeve, where it may appear minor, but I think it truly shows that it is a farce.
Yeah, I definitely see your points. And I think there's a lot of ideas that they could have explored in this film where, thinking upon them more heavily, I think there are a lot of strong evocative ideas, and there's a lot of, like you said, horrific imagery. A beheaded child, a grieving mother, like all of these things. There's some good elements going for them. I think where this movie can really lose people is, like you said, it's almost like a spooky, philosophical destination kill, for like Charlie, for example. Like, it's not like the physics of the Rube Goldberg machine. It's like, here's 2/3 cup coincidence, and here's 1/4 cup Satanism, and it's just like, yeah. I mean, and you're really left feeling like, did all of this just happen by chance? Did this happen by fate? Did this happen by a spectral force? It is kind of yeah, things like that are kind of contrived in that way, and it's like makes you think about how many other things are contrived or caused by what actually in the movie.
Yeah, and that is, to give some credit, that is literally written into the script with that teacher talking about I believe it's Heracles, and whether or not it's more, he asks, is it more tragic if he does have free will over his fate? And one character raises his hand and he says, yeah, and the teacher asks why, and he's like, because. And just a little moment of levity within the script is typical, high school banter in a classroom. But it's directly addressed in the film to raise those questions for the audience, to give it credit. My issue is that I don't think the film itself is well constructed enough to support such a lofty idea. And that is a big thing with the movie. And going back to 10 Cloverfield Lane, where a lot of people say, oh, well, it's a smart horror film. And my criticism of the film isn't that it's smart, it's that I want a smart horror film, and I don't feel that this was it. I feel like you said, with Charlie dying of the allergic reaction, you don't have that cultish aspect of it with the pool, but the fact that they show her head, and I don't even criticize it because it's a memorable, effective shot, but it's basically just a gore shot that's exploitative and just meant to shock. That's his only purpose in the film, and the only reason that it's shown is just to shock you. And the ending is just a jump scare fest, which is a climax of a horror film. Blair Witch doesn't have jump scares like that, but that's a very different filmmaking entirely, of course. Apples and oranges for sure. But even for the average horror film up until the last 10, 15 years, you wouldn't find half as many jump scares as film. And Toni Collette slamming her head repeatedly against the door, and then she's up in the air. It's very Evil Dead, ironically. Some of the floating physics in it and her performance reminds me of the Evil Dead girls in the first film, which is just interesting. And one of the things I actually liked a little bit more about the movie was her kind of floating across the room in one scene. But it's just a totally different tone. It's just very cartoonish, and a lot of people say that. I mean, that's even fans of the movie, they're kind of mixed on that. But I kind of wanted it to be more quiet and more atmospheric and character driven, whereas I actually think it's very much so a sensationalist spectacle film. And you know what, like, if it works for some people in the way that The Conjuring won the first half of that film, I don't really like the climax of that movie either for the same reasons, but I think it's a little bit better of a plot thematically in the end with that one, how it's set up. But anyhow, I mean, if that works for some people and they just like it as a horror film they watch around Halloween or something, that's cool. I mean, I have nothing against that, or if it reminds them of their grief in some emotional level in the same way that we might both read a poem and you relate to it and maybe I don't. That's great. That's one of the best things about art, and one of the best things about conversations like this show is kind of built around, is diversity of opinion and how we each can see different reflections in the same kind of a stained glass or whatever you want to say. I'm a bit too tired for the analogies, but anyhow, that's cool. But the prestige this film has, and just the arrogance of so many people discussing it as though you're somehow just mentally inept for not enjoying it, is just exhausting.
Well, it sounds like how movie discourse unfortunately is a lot of times, especially this past decade. It can be a bit much.
It's very true. It's very true.
I mean, there really is something about like the past 10 years. I mean, superheroes, horror movies, Star Wars, it doesn't matter what it is. It's just like, whether you have positive or negative opinions, it's like they're blown out to such proportions to be oh, if you don't like this movie, it's insulting or it's political or it's like, all right, guys, we are just watching movies after all. Still, I mean, it can be a bit exhausting. But yeah, I mean, when I watched this movie for the first time, I definitely, hard to say I liked it because I was, disturbed more by the performances, and probably if I were to rewatch this movie, I would like it less because I would be thinking about it more on a terms of a logic and contrivance. That being said, like, I liked it. I also recognized immediately when I was writing my review for it that, yeah, there's going to be a lot of people who would hate this movie, and I completely understand on multiple levels. So it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And, like I said earlier, maybe I'll watch this movie again in 5 years, and I'll love it. I got it for $3 at Walmart, a copy of Rob Zombie's Halloween, which was one of the worst theatrical experiences of my life. I hated. And I wanted to rewatch it and give it an honest chance. I haven't seen it in a long time. And I kind of, funny enough, ran into a clip from it the other day on YouTube, just going through horror movie clips, and I probably still won't like it. but
Right.
but I think it's interesting how you grow with the film and have a different dynamic with it, and how you relate to it or appreciate it differently. Some positives I want to say in this movie, because I have been pretty harsh on it. I mean, I don't know, my final review will really... It'll be interesting, my final grade, but some positive I want to say is, I wasn't into the cinematography the first time I saw it. I felt like some of it, like the dollhouse aspect, I get that it's to show that there's a higher power watching over them, and the motif of her making the miniatures and all that. It felt to me just kind of like a horror version of Wes Anderson, which was kind of silly, and to some extent it still is, but
Right.
generally the cinematography is pretty well done. I think that actually Astor greatly improved in many ways with his next film, Midsummer, which I'm not really a fan of that one either, but I think is much better than this one.
And I actually haven't seen that one, so maybe I'll have to.
I feel like I liked the first hour of that movie a lot, and I did not like the second half of the movie.
Interesting.
And I saw the theatrical cut. People like the director's cut more, but funny enough, a lot of the things that I liked about the first hour of the movie, the director's cut I would not have liked. And I almost wonder if it's a film, I hate this term, but I almost wonder if it's saved in editing, like Donnie Darko or something. Because it actually seems like having to cut scenes made it seem smarter than it was, or somehow more dynamic, without getting into the specifics since you haven't seen it. But I've also seen this film before this. I forget what it's called. There's Something Wrong with the Family Name, which has one of the funniest reveal shots I've ever seen in any movie. I think is utterly brilliant and hysterical. And it's a weird movie. That's all I can say. And
what is it, a short film?
Yeah, it's a short. It's only like 20 minutes or something.
Yeah, I think I went ahead and watched it. Is it the one where the son ends up fucking his father or whatever?
Yeah, that.
Yeah, I was very disturbed.
I have to admit, I don't love it, but I love that it exists.
I do love that it exists, but I also hate it.
I think the shot of him talking to his dad when his dad catches him masturbating, and then you see the picture that he's holding and hiding, and it's a picture of his father, because I didn't know that's what it was going to be, is so fucking hysterical to me. And I think it's intended to be.
It is hysterical, but then there's also parts of it that go for drama ?
Yeah.
And I'm so conflicted. I did watch it, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, I don't know, like the father, and like it's interesting when he's older and he's clearly abusing his father and shit. I don't know. I have a great appreciation for that film. That's really all I can say.
It's a concept. I'll tell you that. It's a concept.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I don't think I'll ever watch it again. I don't know that I even like it, but I'll never forget it.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that was the goal. I can at least kind of pin that movie down, that 20-minute film, and be like, I think that's the goal.
Yeah, there's not
They
many
wanted to,
like 20-minute films I see in a year where I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna remember that on my deathbed, but that particular
yeah, right.
one, I will not be able to forget as hard as I try. Um,
Yeah, I feel like this is kind of that director's style. As he, I don't know, it just very much wants to get under people's skin, I guess.
yeah, and he has very specific strengths, and I think in Midsummer he like the thing is it's a messier film than this in many ways, but it also has more positives in some ways. And I do wonder, his next film stars Joaquin Phoenix, so I'm going to have to see it for Joaquin at the very least. Um,
Oh, interesting. Does it have a title?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong. I haven't really been following because I kind of just want to go in blind.
Right.
But
That's fair.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a fan of this director. Like I said, I've seen 3 of his films. I don't really like any of them wholeheartedly. But he has made 3 very different films that I've seen and have very different reactions to. Whereas one's
Right.
a film that's just weird, one is one that I have kind of a I passionately dislike in a visceral level, and then the third, Midsummer, I think starts very promising, and the first like 5-10 minutes of the movie is kind of a masterpiece. It's kind of like, holy shit, this is fucking horrifying and disturbing and incredible. I remember watching it like, holy shit. And then the rest of the movie kind of just peters off from there to the point where it kind of just becomes a dumb horror movie in its last hour, to be honest. Not a bad
Interesting.
one,
No, you have me
but
intrigued. Hey, at least he can definitely make you feel things at the very least.
yeah. Well, the weird thing watching this movie, I guess this will lead into my final grade, is the first time I watched it was like knee jerk reactions, laughing, angry, irritated, all that. And it kind of reminded me almost of, when you love a band and they put out an album that you just don't like at all, and you feel betrayed and you're almost angry about it. And then they put out another album that you don't like, and you're kind of just like, okay, this is just a band I don't like anymore. No hard feelings. I'm just not into what they do. That's kind of how I felt rewatching this movie, where I wasn't
Right.
like, I hate this, but I didn't like it much more. I might have even liked it less than the first time I watched it. I don't know. Because when you first watch a movie, you want to like it, of course, and I wanted to like it on the second watch. That's why I watched it a second time, to give it a fair shot again. But really, it just felt like watching a movie I just don't like. It really wasn't that emotional of viewing. It was just like, I remember this, I remember that. So I guess, I don't know, my final score for the movie, originally I was gonna say F plus. I'm gonna bring it up to a D minus.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I honestly don't know what to grade it. It's been once, and it was 2 years ago, and you know, it definitely affected me, and I guess that did its job in that way. But I'd probably give it like a B minus if we're going with letters, not numbers. But I would probably have to watch it again. But the thing is, it disturbed me so much in my first viewing, I don't really want to ever watch it again.
I would say watch it. Don't Look Now instead.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. You're gonna have to get me a recommended list of like similar movies, and I'm gonna have to like go through those or something.
Yeah, very very different movies in terms of approach, but similar thematically, or similar approaches in certain levels. But I would say Don't Look Now, definitely, if you want that theme of grief in horror, which is based on a short story, I believe, not a novel, by Daphne du Maurier, who actually wrote Rebecca, which is one of my favorite books of all time, one of the most influential books, all my own writing, and also a very great film by Alfred Hitchcock to tie it all together.
Good to know. Yeah, I'll have to keep those in mind. And weren't there some other horror movies that you said were kind of similar, but like executed on some ideas better?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones I would say, obviously you got Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist, which have kind of the more obvious parallels.
Right.
But I would say the original Suspiria, personally, I think has a lot in common with this film. And Suspiria is very different. It's very eccentric, very Italian. It's one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. It is a total flamboyant horror masterpiece. I think it was one of the scariest films ever made. The key to that film that a lot of people don't appreciate, and I recorded a review of that the same night I record my Blair Witch review, is that the film was written so that all the characters were children. But basically, the production studio or the censors or whoever was like, no, you're not going to have this gory film with kids getting killed by witches. So they changed it so that the characters are adults, but they still have to reach up to reach doorknobs, and they still act like children. There's like interactions where it's clear that it was written for kids, but it's adults saying it. But it's a very dreamlike film, and it's clearly heightened reality. It's not in any way aiming for realism. It's very cartoonish, in the same way that maybe something like Hausu, which is a pretty popular film these days, that's become kind of a huge cult classic. It's very similar to that, and I don't know. Suspiria scares the shit out of me. That and Blair Witch Project, I think, would make a great double feature, both about witches and both very unsettling in very, very different ways.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Well, for now, do you have anything to say to our audience?
Yeah, I think we've done a good horror double feature, and I know we both like horror movies, so we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, the last thing I have to say before ending this one, I think, is, for both of these films, they both are divisive. They both have lovers and haters. Maybe some people that fall in between, of which I've yet to meet. Usually it's one or the other. But they're both interesting films, right. And it's always worth watching a film just to make up your own mind on. Sometimes it's worth rewatching a film to see if you change your mind on it. So if nothing else from this podcast, I think it'd be good just to promote making up your own mind on things, or just giving things a second chance if it didn't work for you the first time, because you never know.
Hey, that's the joy of art. It's to experience it for yourself, right?
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, with that, I've been Eric Zavinski.
I'm Todd Crawford.
And we've been Too Cool for the Horror Shop. We'll see you in the next episode.